Documents show that Marcos may have stashed more than $88 million in banks worldwide while taking kickbacks from foreign companies. The papers also reveal that military money was used to finance trips for Marcos and his wife. Meanwhile, a briefcase containing copies of sensitive documents concerning Marcos were stolen at this New York restaurant last night. They were taken from Jovita Salonga, a Philippine official investigating Marcos' finances. Firefighters in South Boston are trying to keep a massive fire from
the Marcoses from repeating their claims that they own no properties in America and have no hidden wealth abroad. John Martin, ABC News, Washington.
Like it was here last night, the House vote against aid to Nicaraguan rebels was big news in Nicaragua.
The ousted Philippine president is still a man without a country this morning. A deal that Panama would provide a safe haven for the deposed leader appears to have crumbled overnight. Jean Meserve now joins us from the State Department. Jean?
Kathleen, word out of Panama sounds pretty definitive this morning, but officials here at the State Department saying negotiations are continuing with a number of countries. They won't say which countries, and they won't say if Panama is one of them. Officials told us yesterday that the final details of negotiations were being worked out between Panama and members of the Marcos party. Apparently, Panama must have found some of the conditions which Marcos set unacceptable, or they didn't like the bad publicity which he was generating.
All right, so, Jean, what is Marcos's legal status here in the United States?
That's a little bit murky. I'm no lawyer, but I suspect that this is setting any number of legal precedents. Steve Solars, who, as you know, is one of Marcos' leading critics on Capitol Hill, has said he doesn't really care if Marcos leaves. And last night I spoke to one of the lawyers for the Aquino government, and she said that it really didn't affect their case, that they were interested more in the assets in this country, that they were not contemplating criminal charges against Marcos himself. As far as they were concerned, they didn't care where he went as long as he didn't go back to the Philippines, where they thought he would cause some political problems.
Jean Meserve live from State this morning. Thank you very much. And the Philippine investigator probing the charges that Ferdinand Marcos stole millions of dollars from the Filipino people was himself robbed overnight in New York City. Police say that Jovita Salonga and his wife were at a Manhattan restaurant when an Asian man approached them and made off with more than $7,000 in cash and traveler's checks, as well as airplane tickets and a passport.
Copies of receipts and pictures of more than $500,000 worth of jewelry, and signed notes from Marcos authorizing payments from a defense intelligence fund to pay for Imelda's travels. In a New York court, Philippine investigators unveiled the first direct evidence linking Marcos to millions of dollars worth of New York property. A handwritten note showing that real estate broker Joseph Bernstein was acting as a trustee for Marcos in his dealings with the Lastura Corporation, which owns the $60 million Crown Building in Manhattan. U.S. officials have made it clear that Marcos will not be granted immunity for his private or business dealings, which just added to the pressure for him to leave the United States. Deborah Potter, CBS News, Washington.
The man heading the Philippine corruption investigation of Ferdinand Marcos was robbed last night in New York City. A man grabbed Jovita Salonga's briefcase and his wife's purse, escaping with several $1,000s and copies of papers related to the case. Police and the FBI don't know if the investigation and the theft are related.
Deborah Potter, CBS News, Washington.
And in the Philippines, the case is being reopened into the murder of opposition leader Benigno Aquino. A Human Rights Commission today announced that it had found new evidence in the murder of Aquino, who was the husband of now President Corazon Aquino. France's new conservative prime minister...
Wife to a Korean restaurant last night. An Oriental man pointed to 5 $1 bills under the table. The Salongas looked down. When they looked up again, his briefcase, her purse, and the Oriental man had all vanished. The briefcase reportedly contained copies of some sensitive papers, but the originals are said to be safe in Manila. Also missing, more than $7,000 in cash and traveler's checks.
And that has frustrated just about everyone, especially the State Department.
These were countries in which he, former President Marcos, had indicated an interest in going. These are not countries that we're picking out of a hat.
The pressure on Marcos is growing. Today, Philippine investigators were given a second inventory of additional property Marcos and his party brought to Hawaii last month. So, escaping to a legal safe haven has become increasingly critical for Marcos, but increasingly difficult, as the new Philippine government today warned other nations granting him asylum would be considered a hostile act. Bill Redeker, CBS News, Honolulu.
Will help. Marcos is thought to have as much as $1 billion on deposit there. And in Washington, the U.S. Justice Department said it will give the Manila government a complete inventory of all items that Marcos took out with him. But the worst news came from Panama. That government said that security problems would not permit Marcos to settle there. However, as NBC's David Hazinski reports from Panama City tonight, there may have been another reason.
This morning, newspapers were applauding reports that the Panamanian government would refuse to accept Ferdinand Marcos, even though a government spokesman didn't rule out a future deal.
But are negotiations going on still?
I don't think so.
Is this matter closed?
Maybe.
Diplomatic sources say Marcos had agreed to pay members of the Panamanian government to move here, but Marcos backed out late yesterday when the officials raised their price. This would not have been the first time Panama has given asylum to a controversial world leader. The Shah spent almost 2 months on Panama's Contadora Island in 1979 after being forced out of Iran. But since then, Panama has developed major economic problems trying to pay off a huge foreign debt. There have been demonstrations and major strikes in response to government efforts to restructure the economy. The Marcos fortune would be welcomed by some here, but opposition leaders complained that the reputation that came with the money would not have been worth it at any price.
Our people want democracy, want decency. We were getting part of the political dirt of contemporary life.
Spain and Singapore have already rejected a request by the Marcos family for political asylum. If Panama doesn't change its mind, the Marcos' next hope may be Mexico. The family has already requested asylum there, and the Mexican government hasn't responded yet. David Hazinski, NBC News, Panama City, Panama.
In the Philippines today, there are reports of mass graves containing hundreds of bodies, possibly murdered opponents of the ousted Marcos regime. The new government's Human Rights Commission said it will investigate this as well as other abuses, including, once again, the 1983 assassination of Benigno Aquino.
They will cooperate if the Philippines government asks for help in recovering money invested in Canada by Ferdinand Marcos. There has been speculation in recent days that the deposed Filipino president has extensive holdings in Western Canada. Manila has taken steps in U.S. courts to regain some of the country's wealth allegedly bled off by Mr. Marcos during his regime. The hunt for a permanent home for Mr. Marcos continues. Yesterday, an American administration official told the media it was still possible Panama would accept the former Philippines leader. But today, the Central American country said it was not interested. More from David Hazinski.
This morning, newspapers were applauding reports that the Panama...
Clashes over the weekend between the strikers and servicemen left 12 people injured. The strikers are asking for severance pay when they resign. U.S. officials reject that request. Some support operations have been interrupted, but military operations remain unhampered. President Reagan launches another lobbying effort today to win approval for his $100 million Contra aid.
And a new cabinet was named in...
Severance pay and other benefits. Until the strike is settled, military personnel are being forced to do non-military chores there on base. And his cronies took the money for their own personal use. Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards is once again...
What former Philippines President Marcos, his wife Imelda, family and entourage took with them. Some of the highlights: a diamond-studded hair comb, cost over $44,000. A match set, bracelet, earrings, and brooch encrusted with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires, value $1.5 million. Also, lots and lots of pearls, at least 59 pearl necklaces and chokers. All told, says the Customs Service, about $7.7 million in cash and jewelry.
Ferdinand Marcos. She also called for a new constitution to be drafted. Meanwhile, in Honolulu, Ferdinand Marcos and his wife Imelda have moved from Hickam Air Force Base, where they've lived since fleeing the Philippines a month ago. The Marcoses have moved into a rented beachfront house in suburban Honolulu, but it's believed that he is still looking for a third country to accept him. This morning, sources say President Reagan will
declared an interim government that gives her sweeping new powers. She said the interim constitution would remain in force until a national referendum approves a new permanent constitution within a year.
Is in Manila. It's a paper chase, Philippine style. The Commission on Good Government here is digging through 20 years of Marcos' rule and coming across reminders of the regime's extravagance and conceit. Found at Malacañang Palace, more evidence of Imelda Marcos' taste in art, a highly glamorized first family, and photos of paintings costing $16,000 each, commissioned by Imelda as gifts for the Reagans, a youthful Ronald Reagan and a regal Nancy. Artist Ralph Cowan recalls what Nancy told Imelda in 1984.
was just incredible, and she was remarkable. She said, but very quietly, she said, I have to turn it down until you win your elections and we possibly win our election.
The White House returned the paintings with regret. Discovered, too, by the commission, more videotapes. Found in her bedroom, Imelda's worldwide travels. The First Lady apparently wanting to keep close to her audience in Rome with the Pope, her meeting with CIA Director William Casey, her stop in Saudi Arabia, and her visit to Lenin's tomb in Moscow. And found in the president's communications room, next to his private study, tapes which show the political opponent whose death clearly preoccupied Marcos.
My conscience is clear and I am willing to face any assassin. The only death I fear is the one in the table of Mr. Marcos. That's for sure. He can order me shot.
Benigno Aquino, a week before his murder in 1983.
Like song, I Am a Filipino. And to hear Marcos himself take to the altar to say prayers, usually reserved for a priest. And finally they came to hear Imelda, not praying, but singing. Following the unusual mass, Marcos stunned reporters with an admission that surprised even Close.
Do you still consider yourself president?
Of course. I have not resigned. I consider the elections as legitimate.
And Marcos may be considering staying in Hawaii.
But Marcos has also talked about moving from this country altogether to avoid the many lawsuits and investigations that have been...
So it's no accident that Defense Secretary...
the United States since his arrival here. Charles Gomez, NBC News, Honolulu.
Defense Secretary...
I have not resigned. I consider the elections as legitimate.
He accused President Corazon Aquino of wanting to acquire huge wealth and dictatorial power. And he said U.S. officials threatened to use U.S. Marines against his forces if he tried to put down the rebellion which led to his ouster as president. Marcos also said charges he had property in the United States and money in Swiss banks were lies dreamed up by those who are scheming to get rich.
Philippine soldiers guarding one of the bases reportedly fired in the air today to disperse the strikers. But labor unrest, of course, is not her only major problem these days. There's also political unrest. Supporters of the ousted President Ferdinand Marcos continue to challenge the Aquino rule. Now, as NBC's Steve Mallory reports, Marcos himself is beginning to make defiant noises.
Yesterday in Hawaii, Marcos made it clear he wasn't giving up.
I have not resigned. I consider the elections as legitimate.
In a letter made public in the Philippines today, Marcos hinted he would return to his homeland. Remain united, he said, so we will see each other again. The letter addressed to his beloved Filipino countrymen was written on palace stationery and dated March 21st. Marcos called allegations of corruption sheer lies, saying, I intend to do legal battle with all the strength and resources at my command in order for truth and justice to prevail. In a tape-recorded telephone message released today, Marcos accused the United States of helping those who overthrew him. Referring to himself as the president, Marcos said, the duty officer in the U.S. Embassy threatened the use of Marines, United States Marines, against Marcos to prevent President Marcos from using his superior military power against the rebels. Although a triumphant Marcos return is unlikely, President Corazon Aquino continues to battle the Marcos legacy at home. Today, more than 1,000 mayors elected under the Marcos regime marched to Aquino's office at the presidential palace to protest their replacement by pro-Aquino appointees.
The people's power delivered the wrong baby. And another dictatorship is coming about after one dictator has left.
There are those who still believe Marcos should be president and cling to the hope he'll return and restore their influence. Nowhere does that sentiment prevail more than in his hometown of Loag. When he fled, his supporters placed a flag-draped coffin in City Hall to symbolize the death of democracy. But even here, few believe he'll be back. Steve Mallory, NBC News, Manila.
The U.S. has been negotiating with several countries about granting Marcos political asylum. One of them reportedly is Spain. Today, the Madrid government said it might reconsider its earlier rejection if Corazon Aquino asked for the asylum.
Aquino. Today, the members of Mr. Marcos's political party decided to convene the Philippine Parliament, even though President Aquino abolished the assembly after taking power last month. Leaders of the New Society movement also said they would challenge in the Supreme Court the validity of the new constitution proclaimed by Mrs. Aquino. Steve Mallory has more.
Yesterday in Hawaii, Marcos made it clear he wasn't giving up.
I have not resigned. I consider the elections as legitimate.
On
Aquino, about 80 members of former President Marcos's political party said they believe that President Aquino had no right to dissolve the National Assembly and take so much power unto herself. They said they will try to hold an assembly meeting next month. There was one report today that President Marcos has sent a letter to supporters in his home province promising that he will return to the Philippines someday. Well, it has been a month now since the Marcoses left their homeland, and they continue to attract a good deal of attention primarily because of their widely reported wealth and the new Filipino government's desire to get it back. Mrs. Marcos has long had a reputation for particular extravagance. John Martin leads the ABC News investigation.
As she traveled the world for her government, Imelda Marcos spent a lot of money for herself. But where did she get the cash? At New York's World Trade Center, ledgers from the Philippine National Bank show it paid out nearly $10 million to Imelda Marcos and her associates over a 7-year period. The money was withdrawn at this office from an account that was supposed to hold funds for Philippine intelligence operations, according to these memos to and from President Marcos. The ledgers show cash payments and bank transfers through 1982, Philippine government money that wound up in the hands of Mrs. Marcos and her friends. On June 4th, 1976, the bank record shows $200,000 paid to Faye Jimenez, Mrs. Marcos's personal secretary. On December 9th, 1976, another $200,000. 6 years later, an advance of $710,000 for a party at the Waldorf Towers. In all, some $820,000 went to Vilma Bautista, a consular official whose name appears on tax records and ownership documents for a luxury estate and several condominiums believed held secretly for the Marcos family. Two former Philippine officials familiar with the New York branch operations told the San Jose Mercury News the money was sometimes carried away in suitcases and taken to one of 3 hotels where Mrs. Marcos stayed in New York: the Waldorf Astoria, the Carlyle, and the Plaza. The Plaza is 1 block from the New York Land Company. That firm is believed to manage the elegant Crown Building across the street in what was a secret trust for the Marcoses. 2 of its officers, Joseph and Ralph Bernstein, have refused to tell a congressional subcommittee in public if they are Marcos agents. But Philippine investigators have turned up this declaration by Joseph Bernstein, pledging to act on Mr. Marcos's behalf.
If anybody in this country knows the truth about the extent of the Marcoses' hidden wealth here, it's the Bernstein brothers.
Last week, the 2 brothers met privately with Mr. Solars in Washington. A second meeting is planned this week with subcommittee staff, suggesting the brothers may be anxious to testify in public to avoid a contempt of Congress conviction.
Bernstein, did you work for President Marcos in the United States to help him acquire properties?
For now, facing up to a year in jail if convicted, Joseph and Ralph Bernstein remain silent in public. In Hawaii yesterday, the Marcoses appeared in public for the first time since they fled from Manila, but also said nothing about the controversy over their suspected personal use of Philippine government funds or their accumulation of enormous wealth. So far, congressional investigators say they see no connection between the cash received by Mrs. Marcos from her government's bank and the investments they believe were made for her and for her husband by the Bernstein brothers. So for the moment, these are 2 separate avenues in the search for hundreds of millions of dollars believed stolen from the people of the Philippines. John Martin, ABC News, Washington.
We have a footnote this evening to our broadcast on Friday. In one of our reports then, we showed how the Armed Forces radio with an American reporter. ABC's Ted Koppel flew to Hawaii for an exclusive interview.
The picture Ferdinand Marcos paints of himself is of an unwilling exile, hemmed in by existing and pending legal suits. An exile whose assets are so thoroughly frozen that he literally doesn't know how to pay his day-to-day expenses. He flatly denies all charges of stealing or misappropriating money from the Philippines and claims that in the final hours of his presidency, the United States assisted the rebels and warned him in an indirect message from the duty officer at the American Embassy that if he used military force to try to stay in power, U.S. Marines might intervene.
I did not believe that the American government would sick the Marines on us. I learned that the helicopters that attacked Malacanang, well, IMHS will come out with it, were gassed and rearmed in Clark Air Force Base.
So that would be by Americans then?
Yes.
Why didn't you pick up the phone and call Ronald Reagan?
I tried to. And for some reason, I couldn't get him.
Secretary Schultz?
Same thing.
Marcos also claims that Washington ordered the grounding of Philippine Air Force fighter jets that might have come to his assistance. He never intended or wanted to come here to Hawaii, and he feels misused by the U.S. government and by the way he, his family, and their lifestyle have been depicted.
You know what most people are interested in? Your wife's 3,000 pairs of shoes.
Well, she gets all kinds of, buys all kinds of shoes. She has probably to change shoes twice a day. And then after a while, because she has to probably feel more comfortable. And there are parties where she can wear high heels. There are parties where she has to wear short heels.
But, Mr. President, 3,000 pairs of shoes, hundreds and hundreds of...
20 years. Those are collections for 20 years.
Adding to the pressures on the Marcos family these days is the condition of Marcos' 94-year-old mother. She is still in the Philippines.
Your mother is very ill.
She's ailing.
If she dies, do you want to go back to bury her?
I'd like to. But even that, I can forget as a part of the sacrifice, because I'm afraid that if I go there, my presence may be misinterpreted. We might cause all kinds of bloodshed. Some people say it might start a civil war. I don't want to do that.
Can you, with serenity, stay here in Hawaii?
There will come a time when I want to go home and risk even death for it.
But those who focus too much on the death, real or figurative, of Ferdinand Marcos underestimate his instincts for survival. Even now, he is engaged in preliminary discussions with the leaders of a number of African states, one of which may yet offer him a more tranquil political sanctuary than he has found here in Hawaii. This is Ted Koppel, ABC News, Honolulu.
Will, Mr. Marcos's version of events is being contradicted in Washington. ABC's John McCarthy is at the State Department.
At no time during the chaotic last days of the Marcos regime did the Reagan administration threaten to intervene with American troops. Said one U.S. official, quote, "That is ludicrous. Using American forces was never even considered. To suggest that is totally off the wall." Sources add that the U.S. Embassy would not have used a mere duty officer to transmit sensitive messages to the palace, as Marcos contends. U.S. Ambassador Stephen Bosworth did all that kind of communicating himself. Helicopters. Half a dozen Philippine helicopters, already armed and flown by pilots who had defected to the rebels, did land at Clark Air Force Base and were refueled by the U.S., but only after rebel leaders assured the U.S. that the helicopters would not be used against Marcos. One helicopter ended up attacking the Marcos Palace. Whether it was one of those refueled at Clark is not clear. Other aircraft. Marcos claims the U.S. grounded Philippine Air Force planes that were to protect the palace from rebel attacks. American officials say not so. Fully armed Filipino planes did land at Clark. They were all flown by defectors. The U.S. refused to refuel any of these aircraft for fear they would be used to bomb the Marcos Palace. Marcos also claims that once he got to Clark Air Force Base, he was told by the U.S. that he could not stay in the Philippines. The choice was no longer his to make. Officials say that part of his story is true, though large parts of the rest of his version of history are not. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
Ted Koppel's complete interview with Ferdinand Marcos will be seen later this evening on Nightline. And later...
I did not believe that the American government would sic the Marines on us.
He said that under the authority of the President of the United States, that he was...
came to me and said, my orders are to take you to Guam. They had disarmed us by that time.
You carried a weapon?
I carried a .357 Magnum and another small caliber revolver. There are parties where she can wear high heels. There are parties where she has to wear short heels.
But, Mr. President, 3,000 pairs of shoes, hundreds and hundreds of...
20 years. Those are collections for 20 years. In fact, it is she who insists that we go home. If they want to kill us, let them kill us. And she says, let's do it now.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel in Hawaii, and this is Nightline. Ferdinand Marcos, in his first interview since his fall from power.
This is a special edition of ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Hawaii, Ted Koppel.
It must seem to most Americans like a curious lament. How much suffering, after all, can it entail to be stranded in Hawaii, quite literally in the shadow of Diamond Head? Indeed, many thousands of Filipinos have found this to be a warm and hospitable home. But Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos are not among them. Pleasant as their surroundings may seem to most of us, the former President and First Lady of the Philippines are in political exile, and they do not feel welcome. She is despondent, he feels misled and betrayed. Marcos manages a touch of gallows humor. His rented beachfront villa is, he notes, just a grenade's throw from the street, where hostile demonstrators periodically protest his presence. She worries to a visitor about what will happen when their current 2-month rental agreement expires. For all the talk about the billions they have stashed away in banks and real estate around the world, they claim to be not merely cash poor, but cash broke. Certainly, compared to what they have known, the Marcoses are reduced to a relatively simple and undeniably restricted environment. His bedroom is plain and smaller than it appears on camera. The rest of the living quarters are comfortable, certainly not opulent. Only the view of the Pacific is breathtaking, stretching beyond the horizon to the Philippines. For the moment, the Marcos family is protected by the U.S. Secret Service. That is expected to end soon. As we prepared for our interview, it was Mrs. Marcos who carefully powdered the former president's forehead. For 5 weeks, Ferdinand Marcos has taken U.S. government advice to steer clear of interviews. Now, however, he is ready to talk.
President Marcos, you're a very proud man. I think even your enemies recognize that. Tell me a little bit what it has been like for you these last few weeks. This must have been
a little depressing. When President Reagan, of course, offered asylum, I expected that we wouldn't go through the indignity, for instance, of having our documents examined, including my personal documents, being charged with smuggling in Philippine currency, which we did not, because it was not brought in by me. It was intended to be brought to the northern part of the Philippines, Lawag, Ilocos Norte, to be specific. I had expected to be free of the summonses and warrants that may attend some of the cases filed here in harassment, because my feeling is that whether recognized as the legitimate president of the Philippines or not, the fact is I was invited to come to the United States, and under international law, my feeling has always been, and I believe this up to now, that even former heads of states do acquire certain immunities that uphold their dignity and dignity of their own. I've always maintained that I am the legitimate president of the Philippines.
Still?
Up to now.
To this moment?
Up to this moment. And that the only legitimate government for the Philippines is the government that I should head.
Where can you go? I mean, it must be a terribly humiliating experience. At one point, you were thinking of going to Spain. At one point, you were apparently talking about...
To be treated like a pariah.
Yes.
It's something which, of course, I never expected to happen in my whole life. But I take it on my stride. If there is nowhere else to go, I either stay here or go back home and take my life into my own hands and tell everybody, well, if you want to kill me, here I am. But you will start a civil war.
There's an irony there, isn't there? I mean, a few years ago, Ninoy Aquino was in the same position.
No. Ninoy Aquino, there was a conspiracy against him. And the conspiracy was confirmed. We asked him to lay off the Philippines for a while because we were convinced that his life was in danger and that we would be blamed for his, and we were.
You are?
Yes, they have been, but God is, of course, our witness. I can swear on a dozen Bibles and people will question it, but I can tell you that if we had wanted to kill Aquino, that was not the way to do it. There was a death sentence against him, and all we had to do was to let time pass by and execute it.
Now, of course, the Aquino affair is history. If any single act caused support for Marcos to dwindle and his power base to unravel, it was the killing of Benigno Aquino. When we come back, President Marcos will describe his last hours in Manila and his version of the pressure, the arm twisting that came from Washington. Ralph Nader on the presidency, two of the most powerful members of his own administration delivered what would be a fatal body blow. His defense minister, Juan Ponce Enrile, and General Ramos, deputy chief of the armed forces, defected to the Aquino camp. When Marcos sent tanks to their stronghold at the defense ministry, hundreds of thousands of unarmed Filipinos took to the streets and blocked the tanks with their bodies. During the same period, contact between Marcos and his one-time friends in the Reagan administration evaporated. His phone calls went unanswered, and when finally a message was delivered from Washington, it came, according to the former president, in a peculiar and roundabout fashion, and its tone was not friendly, but threatening.
Well, there is a message that was sent by the duty officer of the United States Embassy in Manila, addressed to a subordinate officer of the Office of Media Affairs, whose signature is in a letter, which I now present to you. It reads more or less as follows. 25 February 1986, sir. The duty officer of the U.S. Embassy called up to relay a message from Ambassador Stephen Bosworth, stating that the American Embassy is monitoring the situation, that the White House is concerned over violent incidents triggered by the tense political situation in the Philippines, and that they would, that should massive violence continue, the U.S. Marines stationed here may be fielded out to prevent a slaughter.
How do you interpret this letter? I mean, this sounds to me... what does that mean to you?
Did not believe that the American government would sic the Marines on us. And I told some of the officers whom I called for a conference that this probably was nothing but a threat. I told them, however, that we have to be cautious about initiating any aggressive action, but that everything that we do must be on the defensive.
But if you believe that, Mr. President, you certainly
But there was this slight possibility that they would.
Use the Marines?
Yes. The reason for this is I learned that the helicopters that attacked Malacañang, well, I might just as well come out with it, were gassed and rearmed in Clark Air Force Base.
So what you're really saying is that in some fashion, the American government was helping the rebel forces against you?
In addition to which, when I arrived in Clark Air Force Base, I saw the coin planes, our coin planes that were supposed to be used in defense of our installation, grounded in Clark Air Force Base. And so also did I see some of the F-5s based in Basa Airfield, grounded in Clark Air Force
Philippine
Base.
Air Force F-5s.
Philippine Air Force planes, who were supposed to be helping me and our forces.
But I come back, Mr. President, to a question I asked you earlier. You had left the Philippines giving everyone the impression that the reason there was no violence was because of your restraint. That the reason there was no violence was because you were reluctant to cause bloodshed, Filipinos against Filipinos.
Yes, but we were defending. We were not on the offensive.
But now you're telling me that you couldn't because somehow the United States prevented you from doing that.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the threat was there.
The threat to use the Marines?
Yes.
But you're saying
word spread throughout the troops.
That the United States was really opposing you?
Yes. And I had difficulty immediately after that to get in touch with some of the units.
Why didn't you pick up the phone and call Ronald Reagan?
I tried to. And for some reason, I couldn't get him.
Secretary Schultz?
Same thing.
Weinberg?
I wanted to get in touch with Ambassador Bosworth because he had told me that he was the man who was relaying all the messages.
Did you know where you were being taken?
The agreement was that I was supposed to go to Clark and to Lowell.
The agreement?
They never denied. And they never told me that they would take me out of the country.
Well, the agreement the agreement with whom, sir?
With an officer who was who introduced himself to me as authorized by the President of the United States to assure my safety.
What was his rank?
General.
Air Force
I don't know whether I am free to mention his name.
All right, but he said that under the authority of the President of the United States, that he
came to me and said he would like to see to it that I am secured, and I told him I'll be secure if you bring me to Lowell. And there was no other comment except that early in the morning of the 26th, he woke us up and said, the order is for you to go to Guam. And I said, but how about Luwag? That's where we are supposed to go. The situation was that there was no way of arguing our way out of this situation. He said, my orders are to take you to Guam. They had disarmed us by that time.
You carried a weapon?
I carried a .357 Magnum and another small caliber revolver.
When we return, those thousands of shoes which we've all seen, and the hidden wealth which remains to be seen.
From Hawaii.
Among the many things the Marcos family left behind was a batch of home movies, videotapes that must have seemed harmless enough at the time, but that took on a bizarre quality viewed against the rubble of a collapsed political dynasty. Millions of us pressed up eagerly against television's unsympathetic keyhole and watched recorded images of the Marcoses cavorting with friends, many of whom no longer call.
Let me come back again now to this personal humiliation. When you sit and you watched, or when members of your family watch, and they see those family videotapes that you made at Malacañang, what goes through your mind?
Well, what goes through my mind is that, look, these were all simple parties, and they're making them look like orgies in Nero's time. Like the what was it? Birthday party of my youngest daughter. It was a simple party. Everybody was in gaudy, colored dresses, as you would here in Hawaii. We didn't spend very much, but it's made to look as if it is the height of exorbitant luxuriousness. Arabian Nights and the like. And they come up with the conclusion. You see why the people are suffering. And yet, where did we get the money for building all these roads, the bridges, the schools? Where did we get all the money for becoming self-sufficient in rice?
Let me keep you for a moment on
energy.
these. Let me keep you for a moment, if I may, on these tapes. I must tell you, when people heard I was coming out to do an interview with you, you know what most people are interested in?
Mm-hmm.
Your wife's 3,000 pairs of shoes.
How many shoes?
How many shoes?
Can you wear on 20 years?
Exactly. How many can you?
Well, she gets all kinds of, buys all kinds of shoes. She has probably to change shoes twice a day. And then after a while, because she has to probably feel more comfortable. And there are parties where she can wear high heels. There are parties where she has to wear short heels.
Mr. President, 3,000 pairs of shoes, hundreds and hundreds of...
20 years. Those are collections for 20 years.
But people look at those price tags still hanging from the dresses. People look at the price tags on the... They see the jewelry. They see the cameras went into Malacañang, and they look at that and they say, here's while people are starving out in the street.
Well, is that a logical conclusion? That we spent this kind of money? Where did the money come from?
I don't know.
Probably it came from our private funds. Did they prove that it came from public funds? Did they prove that this was the reason why the people don't have any money? Then why did the income of the people increase from 736 to 10,000?
I don't
Why did the deposits in the bank go up 35 times?
Mr. President, I don't think that the equation is if only Mrs. Marcos had not spent the money on the shoes and the dresses, that there would have been enough money there for the people.
But it is obvious that they are implying this. It's very obvious.
I think the question that people are raising is, here is the President, here is the First Lady, the Governor of Manila. It seems somehow indecent.
Oh, well, that's a...
I think that's the charge, quite frankly.
Yes, well, it is, of course, something which compares with showing on television nighties, brass, panties, and the like. You talk about the good breeding, well, that's it. She probably was used to this when I was a young, overspending congressman, when I was courting her, driving a convertible and dancing around town like a spoiled bachelor. But I won't defend her. I will say that she felt that she had to wear dresses in accordance with the occasion, that her duty was not just to be a housewife, but to represent the Filipino people proudly when they are in New York, when she has to talk to heads of state, when she has to go to a funeral of, say, Khrushchev or whoever else, when she has to go to Rome and meet the Pope.
But shopping trips, Mr. President, shopping trips in which she takes advances of $150,000,
those shopping trips are all fabricated. Like saying that she went to Japan and bought $500,000 worth of pearls. That's completely false. That's a lie.
Or $4.5 million expended over 1 month in New York.
Well, probably it was not all spent for her. What is the proof that this was all spent for her? Just because she took it out of her account?
Took it out
of her account. I understand that this is what they're proving.
Well, they're saying two things. They're saying, one, that she had kind of an unlimited account with the Bank of the Philippines, that she could draw enormous quantities of money, and two,
that's false.
That money was taken out of the Military Intelligence Fund.
Oh, completely false. That is where, again, the foreign correspondents may have been mistaken. There is no such thing as a military intelligence fund except that which I control.
I mean, what they're talking about, there are very careful notations by your wife's secretary, Faye Jimenez, in which she accounts for each item. And there are, expenditures of $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 for one painting, I believe, an expenditure that exceeded $1.5 million.
Oh, I seriously doubt that. I haven't seen this matter. If it is a case in court, I don't want to talk about it. But I can tell you this, that we never spent government funds for our personal purposes. If we did, we replaced them immediately. I may have committed many sins in my life, but stealing money from the people and from the government is not one of them.
President Marcos says that he and President Aquino, Madame Aquino he calls her, have never met, never spoken. When we come back, Marcos sends a message to his successor, warning of communist infiltration and the suggestion that someday he will return, even if it means his death. Surprisingly, emphasizing her inexperience, the housewife he called her. But they never met in debate, Marcos and Aquino, and then after the election, neither would concede defeat. Indeed, within hours of one another, each was sworn in as president of the Philippines. Now, the housewife is in power, and Ferdinand Marcos is left to hang around the house.
Mr. President, you said at the beginning of our interview that you have never communicated directly with President Aquino, directly or indirectly.
Yes.
In a manner of speaking, you're talking to her now. What would you like to say to her?
Well, I would say, whatever it is that she is planning, please take into account the broader policies of the safety of Asia, and do not allow the subversive terrorists, the leftist subversive terrorists to take over the government. Please do not be deluded into thinking that you can succeed in negotiations with these I cannot even call them communists because they are, to me, plain outlaws who are under the leadership of an umbrella organization of ideologues who now are in government. Look, you've got the leaders of the Communist Party whom we, under my administration, caught red-handed raping, pillaging, burning villages, and murder. They were engaged also in smuggling in firearms.
You know, the charge, among the many charges made against your administration, is that you threw the word communist around rather loosely. No, and that was also a way, forgive me, that was also a way by which you managed in some ways to tar your opponents, in other instances to imprison many hundreds of them.
Okay, let's give a specific example. Let's be truthful about it. Ninoy Aquino and the members of his household, did they not participate in strengthening the Communist Party when they placed their house at the disposal of the NPA as a, not only a hospital, a resting place?
You're not charging.
I'm not charging.
You're not charging Mrs. Aquino with being a communist sympathizer.
I am saying she wants both, the best of both worlds, of all worlds. I'm not saying that she is a communist. On the contrary, I think she likes comfort too much to be a communist. But I'm saying that she's being deluded, misled by the men around her. And I'm saying that she must now strengthen her character and prevent this dire, this black influence. And then, but let me go into this. You asked me what would be my advice to Madame Cory Aquino. Look, I'm immaterial to this whole situation. She doesn't even have to bother about me. But all I ask is that she now looks into this situation and seek the help of those who can help her.
When you say you're immaterial, I hear you going back and forth, Mr. President, a little bit. Sometimes I think I hear the voice of a man who still believes that he can go back and have power.
Only if they ask me to, only if they think that I am indispensable. But I have no intention of trying to grab power. I have no intention of influencing anyone.
When we come back, President Marcos recalls a snap decision which seemed tactically brilliant at the time. In retrospect, it may have been a disaster. I remember watching the program, David Brinkley's program, one Sunday morning late last fall when President Marcos was his guest. The interview began sluggishly with Marcos delivering a long recitation of his economic accomplishments. And then a reasonable, if predictable, question about elections provoked a totally unpredictable response.
A few months ago, Mr. President, on my colleague David Brinkley's program, you surprised him. I think you surprised almost everyone by announcing a snap election.
I surprised myself, too.
Did you?
Oh, yes, I had thought about it, but I never did think I would make the decision through that medium.
Did you really do it that instinctively, just like that?
Yes. You could say that I was a little irritated that evening about all this news and the attempt to falsify some evidence on again, on hidden wealth.
In retrospect, that was probably a mistake, wasn't it?
No, I don't believe so. I thought that, first of all, everybody will play fair and square. They say now that we overspent. I'm ready to open our books. Part of that money that is spending in the customs was supposed to go to the payment of our bills.
Well, they say a lot more than that. They say it was probably one of the most corrupt elections ever.
Oh, well, it depends on who is speaking, of course. But well, I can tell you this, that we have the evidence to show, for instance, that in one province, in, say, Samar del Norte, where 135,000 voters are registered, only one half were able to vote. And this was one of my bailiwicks. And then let's go the other way. If it was corrupt, and I committed the corruption, why is it that we won in the hometown of Cory Aquino? We won in her hacienda, in her farm, the big farm. I think there must have been about 15,000 voters there. We won in her region. Now, can you imagine me then buying votes in that area or coercing people in that area?
Why not?
Well, because they were in control. They just couldn't control the people. Where at a time when they established peace and order thinking, that the people would vote for them. But the people followed their instincts and voted for me.
Why does she have power today?
Because of the coup d'etat. The coup d'etat by Enrile and...
the coup d'etat, I'm sorry.
Coup d'etat, yes. Yeah. They had planned to take over the Malacanang Palace. I immediately sent tanks and Marines. And then I received the message from President Reagan not to use force against the rebels. Not to employ the military. And it was followed by another message. Two messages were received, also from President Reagan, wherein I was informed that if we use the military organization against the rebels, both military and economic aid would have to be cut off.
You still regard him as your friend?
I think so. Yes, I do. In fact, I should have begun with thanking him and the American people for the hospitality that they have shown to me, because by and large, whatever you may say, I've been comfortable. These little indignities are of no account. With this situation, I am really irrelevant to the situation, because what I'm thinking about is principally the salvation of our country, salvation of our people.
When we come back, being rich isn't all it's cracked up to be, especially when you can't lay your hands on the money.
Special edition of Nightline with Ted Koppel, reporting from Hawaii.
Life for Ferdinand Marcos these days is filled with bitter frustration. His mother, who is 94, is said to be near death in Manila. Her condition is so frail that she's not been told of her son's fate. She still believes him to be president and in power. He is neither, nor, if his account is to be believed, even able to tap his own wealth.
Are you a wealthy man today?
I might say that it is a, a toss-up, because I do not know exactly how much is in the bank. I do know that there are some valuable real estate. I do not know if they have been sold, because some of them were put under the jurisdiction, or rather the coverage of the Marcos Foundation, which is a blind trust. I don't know anything that has been the operations of the Marcos Foundation.
But I mean, you have enough to get by right now?
No. Right now we are hard up. We have no liquidity. We cannot even pay our security. We cannot even pay our doctor's bills. Our funding here has been below even possible healthy requirements, including food. We are hard up for funds here in the United States because every bank account has been frozen. For what reason, I don't know, and under whose orders, I don't know. The money that we were supposed to bring to Lawag Ilocos Norte, which is Philippine currency, of course, has been taken into custody by the custom. And we did not bring it here. We did not commit the crime of smuggling in foreign currency. it was the United States government who did it. Why should we be punished for it? My documents have been purloined. I say purloined because they are private documents. I don't see why anybody should be authorized to look into them without my permission. Now, one last thought, that is, I am ready to help the administration in the Philippines, the present dispensation, out of their present difficulties. In fact, I have I stopped the rebellion in the south. I was able to convince the Supreme Sultan of Mindanao not to wage a jihad, a religious war. Now, I am ready to help in any way. I don't need any power. I don't need any authority. All I am asking is that they now concentrate on this particular aspect. All right, don't even say that it came from me. But what happens to this deal and negotiations with the New People's Army? Are they going to go through with it? I beg of them not to. I ask them to review the history of the relations between the government and the terrorists, the subversives, since 1946.
And what about Ferdinand Marcos? What happened?
Ferdinand Marcos is unimportant in the present situation. I have no intention of going back and trying to grab power. I will, well, of course, go if they ask me to, but that's far-fetched. And probably the best thing to say is, it is my hope that both governments, the United States and the Philippines, will realize the situation, that the Philippines may go under much faster than we think. And I would like to die in my country. I'd like to be buried there. But if it comes under these terrorists, they will never allow me to go home.
Your mother is very ill.
She's ailing. She may die any moment now, but that's neither here nor there. That's part of our sacrifice.
If she dies, do you want to go back to bury her?
I would like to. I'd like to. But even that, I can forget as a part of the sacrifice, and hope that this will be, I suppose, part of the price that we have to pay for a stable Philippines. Because I'm afraid that if I go there, my presence may be misinterpreted. We might cause all kinds of bloodshed. Some people say it might start a civil war. I don't want to do that.
Can you, with serenity, stay here in Hawaii?
There will come a time when I want to go home and risk even death for it.
Soon?
No. How long can you be patient? That's a question that I cannot even answer. I finished my book, my last book, and that's it. I'm free.
Permit me to ask you just one question about your family, about Mrs. Marcos. Is she relatively content here?
She is not contented, of course. She's always crying. But she's learned to take it on stride. In fact, it is she who insists that we go home. If they want to kill us, let them kill us. And she says, let's do it now. Why wait? And of course, I've told her that in a situation like this, it is first important to think not only of yourself, satisfy your ego, or satisfy your whim, caprice. We must first think of the country. I'd like the country to be strong. I'd like it to flourish, prosperous. at least history will probably be kinder to me 20 years from now than presently. And probably chronicle the fact that we did start the spiritual regeneration of our people, their conversion into dynamic production and self-reliant units, and begin a social concord known as the Filipino race. That's all that I can say right now.
President Marcos, I know this has not been an easy session for you, but you've been very gracious, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to unburden myself also.
In a moment, I'll be back with some closing thoughts. Richard Nixon is the man who comes to mind. Not that there's any surface similarity between the two men. Marcos is a brilliant campaigner, a natural politician. Mr. Nixon has always been somewhat ill at ease with politics, uncomfortable on the stump. But beneath the surface, the two men are very much alike. Not only convinced that they will be vindicated by history, but determined somehow to see that vindication come about. The embarrassment of their final days in power, the humiliation of having that power stripped away in full view of the entire world, would drive lesser men into total seclusion. But like Richard Nixon, Ferdinand Marcos refuses to believe his own political obituary. He is, whatever else you may think of him, a scrapper. He is also, like Nixon, a very smart man who climbed the political ladder from lawyer to congressman to senator to president. But also, like Nixon, a man with a blind spot who corrupted the political process. And you can count on one more similarity. Ferdinand Marcos will be, as long as he lives, endlessly fascinating. He, like Nixon, is an interesting man. And perhaps both are right in placing so much faith in history. History ignores only the dull. It will relish the career of Ferdinand Marcos for many generations to come. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Hawaii. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. For a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $2 to Journal Graphics, Box 234, Ansonia Station, New York, New York 10023. Nightline is a presentation of ABC News.